we get a visit to the Klingon homeworld Kronos for some stuff we haven't seen since Season 2 of Next Generation. Dr. Miglimo's race gets a name, but you won't believe what it means. Well, hey everyone, I'm Nick and welcome back to Sci-Fanatics. Well, Episode 4 of Star Trek Lower Decks, Season 5, entitled A Farewell to Farms. This was a sort of an odd episode that kind of came out of left field a little bit. We got a and a B story in this episode, which was kind of cutting back between Boimler and Mariner, helping Mariner's Klingon friends regain his command, whilst Dr. Miglimo on the Cerritos welcomed some visitors from his race that we now have a name for, called the Kloakians. We'll get to that in a minute. There's a story behind that. And it kind of, it cut back forth between these two A and B stories. It was sort of a little bit of an odd episode, I kind of found, but we'll get into that in a sec. We start with our story on Kronos, with these Klingon characters trying to capture a very large targ. We don't get an opening title sequence in this week's episode. Instead, it's a bit more of a cinematic sort of style opening title sequence, where it plays over events that happen in the episode. Mariner's obviously trying to get in touch with her Klingon friends, and we find out these two Klingon brothers who are kind of doing somewhat pedestrian tasks by Klingon standards, operating on a bit of a farm there, doing blood wine deliveries. They seem to be living a very simple kind of lifestyle by Klingon standards. We end up in a Klingon bar that's kind of playing death metal. We get Mariner and Boimler arriving, and there's a reference there to another Klingon who was a traitor named Dorn, obviously named after Michael Dorn, who played Worf for many seasons on Star Trek. But we basically get the sense that this friend of Mariner's, Mark, has lost his command of his ship, and Mariner and Boimler are there to kind of help him regain his captaincy. We get a female character in the bar here, which is voiced by Mary Chieffo. If that name sounds familiar, you'd be right. She played L'Rell on Star Trek Discovery, obviously another Klingon character in that show, reprising her role as a different Klingon in this series. The story kind of comes out of nowhere, I kind of found this episode. We just kind of get thrown into this story that's sort of like, where the hell did this come from? With, little to no setup, and we just get sort of tossed into this little Klingon adventure. Meanwhile, back on the Cerritos, we've got Dr. Miglimo a bit nervous about a group of his people visiting the Cerritos. It appears that his race, which finally gets a name, we haven't had a name for his race before, they're called the Kloakians. Okay, now, if I remember my biology correctly, the cloaca in a lot of animals, and particularly bird life, is the butthole. The cloaca is the butthole of the animal. Not really the best name to name your race after. The part of the body that is used to poop from. Not really that inspiring a title for your race. Not sure who came up with that one. And it seems like the members of Dr. Miglimo's race there are there to sample food, bit of food critic stuff going on with them, and they seem like they're very hard to please. Meanwhile, back on Kronos, they're seeing a Klingon Oversight Council where they plan to run a series of tests to restore Mark's command. Meanwhile, on the Cerritos, they've got a bit of a banquet there planned for the Kloakians, but they're not particularly impressed. They are pretty harsh critics when it comes to food, and they're just basically calling everything bland and, flavorless and not impressed at all with any kind of food, particularly replicated food. Meanwhile, back on Kronos, we see our heroes here going through the first of their tests with the Klingon pain sticks, which we saw back in Season 2 of Next Generation with Worf undergoing a similar pain sticks test. So good to see a little bit of a link back to an old TNG episode there with the old Klingon pain sticks coming back into play. Meanwhile, back on the Cerritos, Tenny and Rutherford have cooked up a bit of a banquet there for the Kloakians, a hogfish banquet, but again, not impressing them particularly much. They're not happy with any kind of food, it would seem. I kind of found this B story to the plot. Why exactly are we going through this? It seemed like the storyline kind of came out of nowhere, and it didn't really seem to, do anything that mind-blowing. Back on Kronos, the second of the test is fighting a huge Klingon Targ, and also the choice to sacrifice one of your teammates. Mark chooses to sacrifice himself. He decides he doesn't want to be a captain anymore because his last posting was under somebody who he didn't particularly like as a leader. Mariner kind of urges that there's got to be another way around this. On the Kloakian homeworld, our food snobs kind of get found out. They've lost their sense of taste and they can't really taste food anymore. And apparently Kloakians are just massive food snobs and that's all they live for. If they've got no sense of taste, then they're kind of useless. Kind of a strange episode, this one. On Kronos, they invoke forced conscription. I think there's a big fight between Mark and the leader Klingon, and then they're able to kill him as the sacrifice. It all kind of, plays out. Kind of found a little bit underwhelming. But in terms of the story in this episode, there wasn't anything that kind of had me really that engaged. We find out that Mariner was here to scan some of these more spatial rifts that they've been uncovering throughout the course of the season. And the only real piece of plot to advance the overall story we had in this episode was the fact that Mariner reveals that these rifts that we've been investigating since the start of the season are being constructed by somebody or something. This was kind of the only really piece of plot advancement I found in this episode. Everything else just kind of seemed a little bit padded out. I thought, to use a food euphemism or whatever from the Kloakian B story, just all a bit undercooked, I kind of found in this episode. But overall, the last couple of episodes haven't been all that mind-blowing. Not overwhelmingly amazing stories that we've been getting in the last couple of weeks. I would have liked to see it continue, but if these sort of stories are just sort of a little bit underwhelming, it's like, oh, well, I suppose it's, maybe a good thing. We can move on to some other show now. I would have hoped that we would be getting, every episode this season being the last season, wrapping up the whole show with all of our characters. Every episode should be a banger. And I don't think the last couple of episodes have been bangers at all. But that's just me. You guys might have a completely different opinion. Completely. But let me know that. Let's, put your thoughts in the comment section and we'll get chatting about that. Always cool merch in my merch store. Plenty of great stuff in there and there's always a sale going on. In fact, from the 8th to the 11th of November, you can get not just 20, but 22% off everything in my merch store. So be sure to take advantage of this amazing bargain while it lasts. Pick up a cool t-shirt or something at a discount price. And it really helps support the channel as well, so I really appreciate that. Guys, if you haven't subscribed to Sci-Fanatics yet, please be sure to do so. Click on that big subscribe button to stay current and up to date with all the latest Star Trek news on YouTube. I'll be back pretty soon with my next video. I'll see you guys soon.